Hello and welcome to AirgunWeb.com, your home for honest, real-world airgun reviews and information where we bring you the facts, not fluff. Today I've got an interesting video for you guys. We're going to take a look at a brand new optic from UTG. Stay with us, we'll be right back. So this is the product we're going to be talking about today. This is the new UTG Scope. Now this guy is a 4-16 by 56 millimeter objective. It's side focus, 30 millimeter tube, illuminated etch glass reticle, locking turrets. It's got all the goodies you're going to want in a really decent scope from UTG. The thing it has that's new, that's exciting, is it has an integrated bubble level. Now why is that so important? Well, before we get to that, let me talk a little bit about this rifle and how we're going to set it up. So this is the Bkl Scorpion 1200 SC. This is my personal rifle and it's one of the guns I really enjoy shooting. The reason is that I can pretty much get 1-inch accuracy at 80 yards just about every time I go to pull the trigger. Now that means this is, for me, a very long-range shooting gun. I've taken game with this well out past 100 yards. Now again, why is that so important? Well, this scope can make that process even easier and more accurate. But before we get to that, let's talk a little bit about mounting your scope. So these are your typical sort of universal mounts. You guys have seen these. They're like this, they grip from the side. So you're going to put these on here and tighten them up. If I can hit the rail, that is. Okay. So in theory, every rifle should be exactly 11 millimeters here on the rail. The truth is, though, they're not. So if you have one that's a little skinny or you have one that's a little bigger, these mounts will actually lean left or right. Now, why does that matter? Well, when you put a scope on your gun, go ahead and take these off here. When you put a scope on your gun, you're already starting at somewhat of a disadvantage. You've got an optic which is up here. And so your line of sight is here and your bore is here. So the way you overcome that is you take your rifle and you're going to, well, you take the tube in the scope, but essentially what's happening is that rifle is going to angle upwards until your line of sight matches where you want to hit it. So if it's at 10 yards, it could be a pretty steep angle. 30 yards, 40 yards, 50 yards, whatever, you can decrease that angle a bit. That's what's called scope optimization, something for another day. Well, what you have when you have this going on is that as the rifle is shooting upwards to hit that intersect, the pellet may still keep going up. So now your shot's above your line of sight, and then gravity works and it drops down. That's why you really need to know your rifle and ballistically how your pellet's going to work, because at range your pellet may hit a little bit low what you're seeing or a little bit above what you're seeing, and that's of course where your mil dots come into play too. So we've got that variation going this way. Well, when your mounts are canted left to right, you include a variation left to right. So if you've got this sort of thing going on, imagine if your scope is over here. So now you've got maybe a left to right movement. So up close, you may hit low and left, but out there you may hit up and right. And that's why these mounts, if they don't sit perfectly flat, they're going to introduce a left to right variance as well as something you're already going to have the up to down variance. So how do we get around this? The mounts I really like to use are the Bkl mounts. The reason I like them is that they grab from both sides equally, and that helps them stay perfectly centered. So it helps limit that left to right variance, and now you're only dealing with the vertical shift in your pellet drop. Now when you add the bubble level with this scope, that also helps you stay perfectly straight. If your scope's mounted straight, you pull your rifle up, you make sure your bubble level is dead center, and now you know that those range shots are going to be true to whatever you've worked out for your mil dots. Now we're going to go ahead and get all this set up, and we're going to take it out to the range and do a little testing. Now these Bkl mounts, they can be a little tricky if you've never done them before. There are instructions, so if you follow the instructions, you'll be fine. Now, Some guns have a little bit wider dovetail, as we've mentioned, and these will not just slide on. They don't. They're actually quite tight already just on this rail. So we know this rail is a little wider than maybe a typical rail. Now, how do you get these on? Well, there's actually another screw hole on the back side here, and you use your locking screw, and that will spread that out just enough for you to slide that right on the rail. We're not quite sure where these are going to end up, so I'm just going to get them on the rail to start with. Go ahead and do the same with the other one. Okay, now those are sort of where we might need them. We'll go ahead and take the top straps off, put our scope in, and see where things fall out. Okay, so we're walking through this process here. I wanted to mention a couple things before we get too far ahead here. The scope does come with its own set of mounts, but these are for a Weaver or Picatinny type rail. So most air guns that I've worked with have this 11mm rail. That's why we're using the Bkl mounts. But if you're going to put this on a powder burner or maybe your AR, something that has a Picatinny or Weaver mounts, you don't need to buy extra mounts. These are good to go. And because this is a uniform size, it should always fit nice and square. So you don't have the same type of problem that you would have or could possibly have with your standard 11mm type dovetail. Now I'm going to go ahead and put this on, and I've had to remove the shade, the scope cap, because the bell is so big, that 56mm objective, even with these high mounts, it was really tight. So we may have to go without the scope caps on this particular rifle. Not all rifles may be this tight, as you've got the receiver here, then you have a little bit of the shroud kind of comes up a little bit. If it didn't have the shroud on it, I think we'd have the clearance. But at this point, we're just going to run without the scope cap. Now the next thing I want to do is set my eye relief. Well, that's pretty near perfect. Okay, I am looking through the scope here, and I see my bubble, and it says right there is level, and that's about perfect. That lined up about as perfect as you could get. Boy, the eye relief was great. I actually struggle quite a bit with scopes that don't have enough eye relief to be comfortable, and that's very good. I'm gonna go ahead and lock this scope down. With the Bkl mounts, you also want to make sure that you just do small adjustments, a little bit here, a little bit there, a little bit here, a little bit there, and just sort of work it in. Don't try and do the full adjustment at one time. You can actually strip out the screws if you get really aggressive. So just take your time, work it down, and they'll hold really well. On a PCP like this, we have virtually no recoil, so the single straps are nice and lightweight. They hold well. So that's basically it. We've got our scope mounted. It's square as far as what I can see through the rifle. I've got nice bubbles right in the middle. We'll take this out to the range and see what we can get. So guys, we're back out here in the range, and we're going to go ahead and sight in our rifle. Now, we've mounted this at the studio, and I really haven't touched it since I got out here. I did go ahead and put the scope cap back on because I noticed there was a little bit of clearance, and it does seem to work okay. If you're concerned about having it touch, this is a shroud, so it's not really touching the barrel. But if you're concerned about that, simply don't use it or get some higher mounts. But I think for my purposes, I might be okay. We'll know after we do a little shooting here. Now, one of the things I noticed, first thing I did was put some shots downrange, and the scope is basically dead center on the horizontal adjustment, and that's why we went with the Bkl mounts. My guess is that UTG is going to ship this scope optically centered, which is what you want. You put it on, and I'm just 1 dot low at 35 yards, which is where we're shooting. I'm still running 4 power, so all I need to do is adjust my point of impact upwards, and we'll be dead center. So I'm going to do that now, and we're going to wrap this up. Okay, let's give that a shot here. So we got here. Okay, we got to come up a little more. A little more. These are 1/8 MOA adjustments, so it's twice what you normally have to do on a regular scope. Just keep that in mind. Okay. Because that's pretty much ready to roll. I've locked down my turret there. Oh yeah. So now what I'm going to do, now that I'm pretty much dead center, we're going to hang a fresh target, and hopefully this thing will perform as we expect it to, and we'll drill a nice clean hole. We'll be right back. And that's it. We'll go ahead and grab that target, finish up a couple points on the scope, and we'll wrap this up. So the star of this video really is this new UTG scope. 4:16 power, 56mm objective, 30mm tube, side focus, adjustable locking turrets, and it's got an illuminated etched glass reticle. And the most important feature that really sets it apart is the integrated bubble level. What does that mean? Well, you get to shoot groups like this. That's pretty cool. And because it allows you to make sure that you're dead even, when you stretch things out to further yardage, you know that you're not going to have to deal, at least not because of your holding the rifle in a crooked fashion, you're not going to have to deal with your shots wandering left and right. So when you take a scope like this UTG and you add it to a rifle like this BSA Scorpion 1200 SE, you really have the ability to stretch things way out and maintain some great accuracy. Because of the bubble level, you're able to make sure that you stay perfectly straight, and it really lets you have that consistency downrange. It's really a great combination. I'd like to thank Pyramid Air for sponsoring AirgunWeb and these videos. When you're looking to buy your next airgun, or you're looking to get your next airgun accessory like a brand new scope, please visit www.pyramidair.com and let them know that Rick sent you their way. My name is Rick Utg, and remember, when you're looking for real-world, honest airgun reviews, think AirgunWeb, where we tell you the facts, not fluff. Thanks for watching.